Sisi is the editor-in-chief at the Markup, a nonprofit investigative newsroom that challenges technology to serve the public good. Previously, she was co-executive director of Open News and assistant managing editor at ProPublica, where she oversaw teams focused on news apps, interactive storytelling, visual investigations, and she's managed large interdisciplinary investigations and won the Pulitzer Prize for one of those. And in 2021, Sisi won the Gwen Ifill Award for her work supporting women of color in news. And her lightning talk is about data and technology as tools for racial reporting. Let's welcome Sisi up.
All right, thanks everybody. And also special thanks to Erica for dealing with the fact that I just sent her a bunch of URLs to show all of you. So, but hi everyone, so I'm Sisi. I just hit my 1-year anniversary at the Markup last month as editor-in-chief, and it has been a ride. But I think my career in journalism has been intertwined with data and technology since the very beginning. I thought I wanted to be a breaking news reporter or an investigative reporter when I was in school. And then I quickly discovered that I really liked to code and to design things. Magazines, like comic books, whatever it may be. And that evolved into a career in journalism that really started in making interactive graphics and then data analysis. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the Markup and specifically the work we do in that space, because it has been crucial to how we're able to do our reporting. And as a result, add an additional layer of evidence to further bolster the efforts of an entire ecosystem to create change. So if you've never heard of the Markup, we are a nonprofit investigative newsroom, and our mission is to challenge technology to serve the public good. So this is a mission that we created after I started, and there's a lot of layers to this. The point is, we don't have a point of view on whether or not technology is good or bad. It can be either. And the place that our journalism and our coverage wants to take it is for technology to be in a place where it's actually serving people, right? And it doesn't matter if it's the technology itself, the design of the technology, the choices we make around it. We want it to serve people. And along those lines, we all care a lot about the fact that our journalism needs to be actionable. And the way that we often approach this is through this idea of equipping people with both the knowledge and the tools to make the change that they need to see, right? So I'll tell you a little bit more about how we do this. So if you go to our next page, it is our tools page. And this is just an example. We use our software skills to create tools. But what is a tool? Tools can mean anything. So when it comes to the Markup, when we think about tools, it usually means it is now giving you a much easier way to accomplish something that you might need special skills otherwise to accomplish, or you might need to ask an expert in order to accomplish. So for example, Blacklight is a tool that we created. It's probably our most popular tool. It lets you put in the URL of any website, and we tell you all of the different ways that you're being tracked on that website and by whom. So we'll tell you, is there a keylogger? Is Facebook tracking your data here? How many cookies are there, right? So have fun. But we also, in the spirit of solutions journalism, which I absolutely love, we also have an article that walks you through, okay, I scanned a website that I go to a lot and it is terrifying. What do I do, right? So that gives you a general example of what a tool is. We need software skills in order to make that. And one of the founding principles of the Markup is the fact that we want to marry these data analysis and software engineering skills with journalism hand in hand to do our work. And it's really important for us because we cover technology, and the way that I like to say it is we have to use technology to cover technology in order to get to the guts of it. And so I want to walk you through one example of an investigation that we've done that touches upon how it affected both our conversations about race in a way that I had not yet encountered, but also what it was able to do for both the communities that we were covering, as well as probably spurring the first instance in which we created some citizen science and citizen journalism. So the next tab is going to be on an investigation that we launched last fall. And speaking, I feel like we're on theme today. Speaking of the digital divide, which we all know, the Markup did an investigation in which we found on top of the digital divide, there's this practice called tier flattening. Some of you may be familiar with this. Basically, the crappy part of tier flattening is the fact that the digital divide exists, right? So people are getting different levels of internet, some of which is so slow it's not accessible, and then they are being charged the exact same amount of money for that internet, right? So you've got the really fast internet and the not usable internet, and you all have to pay the same amount of money. And that's pretty messed up. And what's interesting about this is that tier flattening, we did not scoop the idea that this was happening, right? People know, people in communities know. What they didn't have is definitive proof on a systemic level that this was happening, right? And the Markup thought, okay, can we make that? Like, is there a way to get that information? Because it's not like the telecom companies are just gonna release all of their pricing data to everyone. They don't have to. And so what we did was for a couple of months, we wrote software to collect this data. And we only had a certain amount of capacity. We looked at the most populated city in every single state. And we took a random sample of addresses, and then we ran them through AT&T, through Verizon, and then through 2 other telecoms that were large but regional, right? CenturyLink, I think, is one of them. And then we collected how much money they were offering people at these addresses, right? And then we figured out with census data, what is the socioeconomic situation, what is the racial demographics, et cetera, put that all together. And we did our analysis, and we basically were able to prove with math, is basically the way that we put it, prove with math that they're surprised to no one in this room. There's 3 communities that are provably disadvantaged in this situation. One is low income. One is what we labeled as least white, and I'll talk about that, right? Least white communities. And then the last one is historically redlined, right? Okay, so you see how these 3 things are connected, but now we're able to prove it with math, The reason why proving it with math is important to us is because we think about how do we create change, right? An entire ecosystem has to work together to create change. And so the proving it with math part is the part that really helps with changing regulation, right? It's giving something into the hands of people who have been making this case, but now have access essentially to an independent study on it that we've done. But on top of that, we also need to make it practical, right? Like, the people who are dealing with this are not gonna wait or shouldn't have to wait for a huge regulatory change for internet to become, say, a utility to be able to be regulated in the first place. And so after this, what we did, if you go to the next one, we show people exactly how we did it. It took about 8 months, I think, for us to do the data collection, all of this. We wrote out exactly how we did it. And that further bolsters the sort of proving it with math part in case people want to question that, right, and really tear it down. But if you go to the next slide, what we built for people is this map. And if you're able to scroll down a little bit, that would be great. But if you can't, it's also okay. Because when we did all this testing, right, everyone wanted to know, so can I see my address, right? Did you figure it out? And the claim that we make in the main story, and we do this with graphics in there, is that you could be living literally one neighborhood over and getting crappy internet for the same price, right? And we have an example in the story where you're literally 2 blocks away, right? And the amazing thing is even the unions of the telecom companies know this because they're installing the internet. They complain about it, not heard. And so we made this using the data that we collected during the investigation so that you could look it up. But sadly, this is only available for the most populous city in every state, right? Because that's all we had capacity to do. Now, there's great joy in us publishing this, especially because the Markup before me had never published a map like this before. And the reason isn't because it's technically hard to publish these maps, right? We've all seen them on the internet. The thing that really bothered us, however, is that every map that we put out there, that, or the world puts out there that you see, usually using Google Maps, maybe Mapbox, the companies do not allow you to turn off tracking of your users. And the Markup has a very stringent privacy policy. We can't use them. We tried to get them to let us turn it off, and they were like, no, you'd violate our terms of service. So we found like a European tiny map provider, thank God, because otherwise we were ready to build it ourselves, which was gonna cost a ton of money. But yeah, so now we use this very tiny European map provider to do this so that when you look at this page right now, no one is being tracked. Okay, so that's one layer. So we're giving people information in the largest cities. What about everybody else, right? We got this question immediately. People were like, I live in the second most populated city. I just live in another area in this state and I would like this information. Very legitimate. I too would like to give them this information, but what can we do? So this is where the citizen science part comes in. So if you go to the next tab, we started thinking about what needs to exist in the world so that any high school science class, let's say, could do this as a research project themselves for their own community. And so we put out this piece as well as a couple of other pieces. And there were two tools that we built in order to make this happen. One is just a simple Google spreadsheet with some hidden formulas inside that people could duplicate. And what that does is we're helping people track individual addresses and then how much money they're being charged if they want to get internet. And then when you put that in, the spreadsheet will automatically pull in all that census information for you that we merge together, right? So that's one element of it. Another element of it is that the hardest part that was difficult to automate is the fact that in order to prove it with math in this instance, you have to have a random sample of addresses in a place. And I thought this is a common thing, right? If you deal with data analysis as a journalist or not as a journalist, you frequently need to do this, and yet there was no tool that would do this for people, right? And so we were like, no, the bar cannot be you have to learn how to do that, then you can do this investigation. And so then we ended up working with another organization, Big Local News, and we made a tool. We named it USPS. It was really smart for SEO, but also I just love doing that kind of thing. We named it USPS. You can type in like county, your city, whatever. It will generate a random sample of addresses for you. And it has so many uses in the world outside of this investigation. So with those two things in place, we were finally able to write this article to tell anybody, if you want to do this, how you do it. We've seen community organizations use it. We've also do custom cuts for journalists. Shout out to Candace at Outlier, who did a piece or Sarah did a piece in Detroit. And it was incredible, right? So this is what I mean when I say software and data analysis together allow us to equip people with the knowledge and the tools that they need to make change. The last shout out I'll give to is this high school class called Fresh Supply in Chicago, who did this as a summer project and then presented it to their mayor, and it was like the most heartwarming thing I've ever seen. They have a whole video that they made about it. Anyway, okay. So let me talk to you about this least white language, right? So I debated this a lot because I've been a data journalist for a long time. We often, especially because covering it in the United States, we could say something else like majority residents of color, right? Or something like that. Something else that doesn't center whiteness as the way that you're talking about something. And so when I first encountered the fact that we wanted to describe everything in the series of stories as least white versus most white, I was like, well, why are we doing that, right? This investigation was underway when I joined the Markup. And so I had great conversations with our reporter on it because Aaron Sankin, super talented guy. I had a conversation with him because I was like, if we're talking about redlining, are we actually just trying to say like most black, right? Is that what we should actually be saying in the story? And he's like, no, Sisi, here's what you gotta understand. The reason why we measure it based on percentage of whiteness is because sometimes in a given place, the disparity isn't even about majority white versus majority POC. It's about if you go from like 90% white to 80% white, it gets worse. And so it is literally about the percentage of white residents in a place. That's the correlation that we're finding. And so we landed on least versus most white because it just felt the most accurate to describing what is actually happening here at a level that I had never actually encountered in other investigations. And so that was fascinating to me, but we talked a long time about that, trying to figure out what is the right phrasing for this that is most correct. And also felt like actually what was the problem, right? Like, what is the tipping point? So that's one thing that comes up a lot when you're like making up how to do things on the fly, trying to make them sound, but also usable practically to people. I'll give you two final just examples that I will go through very quickly, because using data and tech as racial reporting tools comes with all different levels of complexity. Some stuff is way simpler than others, and I just gave you an example that was super complex. So I wanna give you some examples that are actually way simpler and have like similarly great impact in the world. So this project was a project about these early warning dropout systems that schools have for students. In particular, in the state of Wisconsin, our investigation was about the fact that the moment a kid graduates middle school, they are assigned a score of how likely they are to graduate high school. That score is then given to the principals and the teachers of their high school. Right? Ridiculous. Now, normally when we find stuff like this, it's because a school has a problem and they bought some technology from like a company. In this case, the Department of Education in Wisconsin actually built this themselves. Like they had a whole paper with like tons of math and they built it themselves and they were like so proud of it. And they were like, we use like 10 million algorithms together and then we like average it, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's really that complicated. And you do not need to be a data journalist to notice this, but when you look at it, the thing that was really alarming to our reporter is that one of the data inputs is literally the student's race, right? So right? We have experts in the story that say this. I don't care how complicated your algorithm is, you can't use race in the input. Like, it will affect your output in a way that does not make any sense. So great. We did a survey of schools seeing like, teachers, do you know how to use the information you're given, right? How do you use it? And we found some examples of people trying to use it for good, right? The most noble interpretation is that what they're actually trying to do is prevent people from dropping out, right? And schools are trying to do that. But then, of course, what ends up happening is that it makes students feel some kind of way, right? And so this is an example of often in the work that we do, we have to tell people about something that is affecting them that they have no idea. And we talked to a lot of students. They had no idea their teachers even had these scores, but they were not at all surprised because from their lived experience, they were like, oh, that really makes sense to us because we've always felt like our teachers treated us like we weren't gonna graduate, right? But the amazing thing is that then they would tell us amazing stuff like, so what we did instead is we made a club and now we help each other take AP classes and now we're doing awesome and our GPAs went up, right? So like being able to feature all of that, but also like they had no idea these scores were a part of it. We found out that a lot of educators were just given the score and that's it. There's no training, like how you use it is so subjective. And so like that's just an example of like I don't need to dig into the algorithm, right? Like it doesn't matter how it works. There are parts of it you can just pick out that should not be that way. And so we did a follow-up story, I think, this weekend about how it might be a civil rights abuse. So, and then I'll give you one last example because I think this is really important, which is people think, we deal with this a lot. People think tech is so complicated. It can be, but it can also be really simple. So we did a story investigating, in the last slide, we did a story investigating this algorithm that Los Angeles County was using to suggest how vulnerable a person is. And the more vulnerable you are, the more you can be matched to subsidized housing if you are experiencing homelessness. Right? So LA's scoring system for subsidized housing gives Black and Latino people experiencing homelessness lower, if you could scroll down, priority scores. So This is, okay, so I'm using this example because it is an algorithm, but it is actually the simplest algorithm that can possibly exist. It is like a questionnaire, and you answer yes or no to like 24 questions, and that's about it. And then depending on if you say yes or no, you get a score of 1. And then if you get a score that's high enough, it is pretty determinate of whether or not you will actually get matched for housing or not, right? Based on the limited resources available. And again, this is an instance where we're not breaking news. People know about this. Virginia Eubanks wrote a whole chapter about this and automating inequality. But the problem was nobody could ever get the results so that they could analyze it, right? People knew it was happening, but they couldn't see like what actually though is happening as a result. And so we FOIA'd for the data. It was a embattled process of the ages. And then we got the data, and we were the first ones to ever get it. And we did the analysis, and lo and behold, right, not only were there racial disparities like you see in the headline, there was also age disparity. And so I'll share one last thing is that this is a case in which it's like all, systematic issues up the wazoo, which is anybody who wants fundraising, or not fundraising, anyone who wants funding from the federal government from housing has to have some way of evaluating this, and it's not quite there's no like requirements on exactly how you have to do it. And then they bought technology from a startup that would help them do this, that came up with this system. We interviewed those startups, and they were like, you can use it. We don't sell that anymore. But you can definitely use it if you want to. And it was basically like everyone who had created this system was stepping away from it, but it's the best that the county's got. And we talked to the people who are actually doing the matching, and they were like, yeah, like all things equal, the score is what decides, right? So anyway, the last thing I'll say before I wrap it up, because I think I'm over time for just my part, is that we are really aware of the fact that being able to hire people with data journalism and software engineering skills is an extreme privilege and outlier in journalism. And one of the things that we really want to do, partially because of where I come from, because of what our reporters believe in, and because of the really great experiences we've had, is that we do really want to help other people do this journalism more. And so if anybody wants to sort of talk about that, please don't hesitate to come find me or hit me up. I'm very easy to find on the internet because not a ton of people in America have my name. So anyway.